today I have the pleasure of speaking with Ms. Benedetta Scuderi, member of the European Parliament for the Greens political group and member of the Committee on Women's Rights and Gender Equality. She is also shadow rapporteur for the report on the Gender Equality Strategy 2025. Thank you so much for your time, Ms.
Thank you.
Scuderi. First of all, I want to ask you what are the FEM committee's main priorities right now and what are you personally focusing on?
So the FEM Committee main priorities, as you said, we worked on the gender equality strategy. We have just approved My Voice, My Choice. Was approved first in the FEM Committee, and then today in the plenary, which I think is one of the greatest. Is a very good, big achievement for feminists and women's rights, having the possibility of safe abortion and making clear again what's the position of the Parliament and respecting a citizen initiative, European citizen initiative. At the same time, like in general, what we are trying to push for in the FEM committee is to have a mainstreaming of gender policies and also for the application of gender policies. Like we have a lot of strategy, we have a lot of plans, but we are struggling to apply many of them, and that is something that the FEM committee is trying to push for. In this committee, I'm working on, as I was saying, like health and reproductive rights. I'm also working on the connection between the labor market, the labor policy, economic policies, and gender equality and gender rights, women's rights. As I'm also a member of the EMPO committee, so the committee on work and social affairs. So I'm trying to connect the two fights and bring this kind of side also in the FEM committee to make it more concrete.
Thank you so much. And so, as shadow rapporteur on the 2025 Gender Equality Strategy report, are you satisfied with how the text turned on?
Yes, I am satisfied how the text turned on. It's still very ambitious. It has a lot of very good points in it. However, it was taken in a very hostile political environment. There was a block from the far right on many initiatives. It was very hard to talk about structural issues. It was very hard to talk about feminist fights. It was very hard to talk about mainstreaming. It was very hard to talk about trans people rights and to make it more inclusive, abortion. There was always like this block from the far right, and on certain topics this block was also empowered by the center right, like the Popular Party. And indeed, although the text, I really think, is still an ambitious text, is still driving us to the right direction. There's been some defeats that we can address in the final text, and that was because of an agreement with between the far right, not an agreement, but like voting of the far right and the Popular Party, the EPP. For example, on the budget, we don't have a clear budgetary line. On gender equality, there's not been the mention of having a mainstream of gender policy, mainstreaming of gender policies in the different files and in different committees we have. There's not been a push for gender equality budget in the MFF, so to also have that taken into account in all the different budget voices, and that is because of this kind of like counter block that we are having on the most conservative and even more extremist right wing of the parliament. On the other side, we have very good win. We have had there's a very strong connection with the care and employment and the economic sector and the gender equality strategy. There's a very strong connection with health and reproductive rights. There's a strong connection into intersectionality. So we are trying to give, that's a kind of fight that we've been giving a lot on the intersectionality side of gender equality, which is not one-sided, it's not one silent, but it's got like different voices and there's different layers of discrimination. This is a kind of line that we try to include, and in certain parts of the strategy is still there. There is Of course, like mentioning to abortion rights, the sexual and health reproductive rights, so to trans people rights. So we have managed to keep the structure in a way, with some, I would say, big defeats, because if you don't have mainstreaming, if you don't have structural processes and don't have the budget, especially like budgetary line, that is a big issue. And I think for this we need to say thank you, or it's the fault of a certain part of the parliament that doesn't take it very seriously. We know we can talk a lot about gender equality strategy, but then if we don't put the measure that make it practical and possible, then we don't take it seriously.
Yes, sure. And you also mentioned the MFF. And in this context, according to the report and findings of the European Court of Auditors, gender equality, although one of the main horizontal principles of the EU financial framework, has not been integrated as effectively as the other three principles. So I want to ask you, why do you think this is the case, and how can the European Parliament help ensure that gender equality is fully embedded in the next MFF?
That was certainly something we should have pushed into the gender equality strategy a bit more strongly. So that is a big a lost opportunity there. However, we have gender mainstreamings in all committees. So every committee has also like a gender mainstream committee, which I think is extremely important. And in this kind of like working groups, there are working groups. That's something that we can, we can push for the gender equality lines and to be mainstream on the whole MFF. I think the budget committee has a big responsibility there. And it's an interesting fact because the budget committee is very male dominated. And this is probably something we should think about when we are deciding on committees. There is a fact in this parliament that the most hard law committees are more male dominated and the most soft law committees are more female dominated. And I think that is a structural problem, is like of the society, and that is reflected in the parliament. And this is something we should work on, like at the beginning of the mandate and the half and the mid mandate, to have this kind of equilibrium, to make sure that where budget is decided, where hard law is decided, there's also like a big and decent female women representation, and then bring this idea of gender mainstreaming. So I think these working groups can do part of the job. There's also there's also the push that we can do in the other side, like budget voices. Like for example, I'm responsible for the Green Group for two of the budget voices, for Erasmus Plus and the European Competitiveness Fund. And in these two areas, I would like to bring the idea of gender mainstreaming into the budget lines, because we are talking about two big chunk of the budget, and that's also like a responsibility of people that believe and take seriously the need for gender equality to work towards that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And yes, so turning to legislative instruments, what would you identify as the main challenges in the proposed Employment Equality Directive and the Directive Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence? In your view, in this context, what improvements could help ensure a, a stronger compliance and more effective implementation by single member states?
So I think we should really look into as I said at the beginning, like we need a strong implementation side, and that's also like something that the Commission should be following a lot. We can provide a lot of indication, directive legislation, and then not having a follow-up on what is actually being done. We need data, first of all, and this is one of the main things that we are lacking, especially on gender strategy, on gender rights, in many of the different sides and areas of gender rights and gender fights, gender fight issues, I don't know, gender-related issues, we are having a huge lack of data. Like we're saying that, like you were talking about job quality, we're seeing that like in the care work. Like that is a huge part of gender inequality, because the care job is mostly on women, and mostly on women. Is the burden of this kind of job is mostly, it's a lot not unpaid, and it's an area, a black area, where we have almost zero data. There's different initiatives that are trying to collect data, but we need a commission initiative to concretely collect data and understand what is the impact of the legislation we have, and what should be the impact, or what kind of legislation we should have. So if the member states are actually implementing it, we cannot know that if there's no data. If they are implementing it, it's not good enough, we need to do more. Or if they're not implementing it, we should push for them to implement what is needed. Is it funding needed? Is just a lack of the member states? Like what kind of action we need to take? And without understanding the issue, without having the clear data, we cannot do that. So I think the first and most important step is to have a structured way from the Commission for data collection on gender-related issues.
Thank you so much. So, talking about member states, in Italy, the Italian government has just passed the bill criminalizing femicide. So, can you give us your impressions and ideas on this, and what additional measures do you think are needed to address this issue more effectively at the national level?
I think that creating the Institute of Feminicide within the crime law is important, because we are distinguishing between a normal homicide and an homicide that has the purpose that is being done because the victim was a woman. So that is the reason of the killing. And I think it's important for cultural issues, for prevention, more than from prevention, is for cultural issues, to recognize that as a phenomenon. And once you recognize that as a phenomenon, you understand that is a structural, systemic issue, because that's a hate and discrimination towards women because they're women. And that is why we need feminists, and that's why we need education, and that's not why we need gender fights, like fights for gender rights. So I think in cultural sense, it's very important to have this kind of recognition of the phenomenon also in the law, in the crime law. I don't think it's a prevention. All sociological studies are telling us that the change in the crime law is not really preventing the committing of crimes. What prevents the committing of crimes is education. So I think I agree. I'm completely fine with the fact that we created femicide. It's actually something that I would have voted for, but that's not prevention. The prevention gets into the education system, and Italy is going backward on this. We need absolutely to have sexual and effective education within schools, from like kindergartens to high schools. It needs to be adapted to the age of the people. It needs to be made by professionals, but it needs to be there. It needs to be mandatory. So without this consensus from families, because families, they are in charge of the education of the kids, but they are not always able to give the education. Sometimes they are the bad examples, and the bad examples will never say yes to sex affective education. It's like someone that doesn't believe in science, and then needs to decide if their kids are gonna study science or not. They will say no. But that's exactly the kids that you want to study, because you need people to believe in science. And they have the parents that don't believe in it. And this is exactly the same. We need to make sure that that basic sexual affective education that explains what consensus means, what relationship, what kind of like affection means, how I relate to the other, how I respect the boundaries. This is what we are talking about here. And this is not always provided by parents. either because they have lacking this kind of knowledge, this kind of education, or even if they have it, it's proved that this kind of conversations are the one that are never done into the family because of a kind of shame, especially on sexual things. And then we learn from what pornography or whatever, and it's extremely bad. We learn violence a lot without understanding that we are learning violence, and that's how you get into feminicide, you get into gender violence. So that's why education is so important, and it's important that it's mandatory and not on the wherever of the family. Like the public school is made like this. It's mandatory education, that basic education that all citizens need to have. And then if the family want to give more values, different values, they are completely free to do it, of course. But everyone is entitled to a basic level of the same education that is scientific, that is relational, that is civic education. We need to start from the same basis.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your valuable insights, Mrs. Scuderi. Perfect.
Thank you so much. Really, it was great.